All right, guys, so we are back to complete the bottom portion of our texture chart. So we are going to be starting to mix some colors. We're going to do a value scale, and we're going to kind of mix up some different values here. But the first thing we're going to do is start with some of our basic colors. Now, remember, in our palette, we've got a couple of colors that we have duplicates of. So we've got our warm red and our cool red. We've got our warm blue and warm green and our cool green, which means we don't have just a red and we don't have just a green. So when we get to these colors in our list, we're gonna need to mix both of those together. So both of my reds are gonna combine to create a true red. And then both of my greens will combine to make a true green. So the first color in our set is going to be red. So just like always, I'm going to put a couple of drops of water onto my palette, and I'm going to take some of each red and mix it into that water. Now, it's kind of important that when you are mixing, that in between colors, okay, because I'm about to switch to my other red, I'm gonna rinse my brush off, okay? We do not want to cross-contaminate our colors by going from one to the other. So even now, I'm picking up some of that red, of my cool red, and mixing it in. If I were to go back, I would be contaminating that color. So if I wanna take more, I'm gonna rinse my brush off, give it a little dry, so I'm not putting too much water into the color, and then mix. And of course, we're going to take our scrap piece of paper, and we are going to test this color to see if it is decent. I think that's a pretty good red. It's a good halfway point in between. So I'm just going to take that color and I'm going to paint in the box. Doesn't have to be fancy. You just want to get the color into that box. I'm going to kind of dry my brush off a little bit so I don't have a huge puddle of color on there. And we're going to give that a second to dry. So instead of mixing the next color in the sequence, I'm actually going to do all of my easiest colors first. So I'm going to put orange where orange is. I'm going to put yellow where yellow is. So I'm going to move forward and do that. And then I'll come back when it comes to mixing the two greens together before we finish out the initial part of our row. All right, so I've gone ahead, I mixed up my orange, mixed up my yellow, I tested them. I left a little space in between on my scrap piece of paper because I want to try testing some of those tertiary colors in between afterwards. And now I'm ready for my green. So I put a little bit of water onto my palette already. And again, just like with the red, I'm going to put a little bit of both greens, mixing them together on the palette, because one has more yellow in it, the other has more blue in it. So we know that yellow and blue make green. So we need to figure out, which one's going to make the truest green. So by mixing the two of them together, you're kind of making an in-between color, which should give us our actual green, which I have right now. So I'm going to now paint in my green box. And then I will finish my last two colors in the sequence, which is going to be blue and purple, which are already on our palette. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and talk about how to do our tertiary colors. All right, so I've gone ahead, I've finished up, and I now have my blue and my purple. As you can see, they're still wet and they're starting to dry. And now I'm going to go back and start to mix up my other tertiary colors. And so I have some colors already on my palette that I can definitely use. I'm gonna make some red orange, but here's the thing. So I'm not going to use the red that I've mixed up. If I want to make a redder version of my orange, I'm actually gonna use my warm red. Okay, so I'm gonna take some of that warm red off the palette and I'm gonna mix it in with my orange that I already mixed up. This is gonna save us some time. It's gonna save us some mixing. And I'm going to test it in between my red and my orange swatch on my scrap piece of paper. And I can tell it's definitely more orange than the red that I have there, and it's more red than the orange that I've painted here. So with that, I'm going to now paint in my red-orange swatch. All right. And so then the next color in the sequence is yellow-orange. So I already have my yellow on the palette. So what I'm going to do is take some orange from the palette. All right, I'm not going to take my red-orange because I've already mixed that up. I'm just going to take some of the orange, and I may have put a little too much in there. We're going to find out because I'm going to test it. And I think that's good. It should look kind of like a gold color, definitely more yellow than orange. I think I'm going to put just a tiny bit more yellow into that for me. I want it to be a little bit more yellow than orange because it is yellow-orange. So I'm going to mix that up. And you noticed I rinsed my brush off before I did anything. And that's more of the gold color that I want it to be. So now that's going to be my yellow-orange square. I'm going kind of quick, I don't expect you to go this fast. You can pause the video. You can slow it down on YouTube. There's an option to do that. So don't feel like you have to rush through everything the way I am. I'm just doing it because I want to make sure that I get you all the information. So now I have my yellow-green. This is my green that's mixed. I would like to use only my warm green. So I'm going to take some clean water, and in a blank section of my palette, I'm going to put some yellow in there. So I'm kind of going to remix a pure yellow pigment. I think I'll do one more. And then I am going to test this on my test sheet because I want to make sure that it's nice and bright. And that's a good yellow. And now I'm going to rinse my brush off. And I'm going to take some of my warm green, which is on the end, and mix that in. And you should get sort of this like lime green color. And again, I'm going to test that, and oh, that's a good color. That's exactly what I want to see. And then that's going to go into my yellow-green box. So, and remember that these tertiary colors, they're half and half of each of the colors that are in the name. So this is YG, yellow-green. So there should be almost an equal amount of yellow to green in this. And of course, the green already has yellow in it. So technically speaking, there's more yellow than blue in the color. All right, and then we're going to move on to the blue-green. Again, this is a cooler color. I already have my blue mixed up on the palette, so I'm going to take just a little bit of water, and I'm going to grab my cool green. That's the one that's closest to the blue. Grab a good chunk of that and mix it in. And you should get almost like this teal sort of color. I know it's hard to see on the screen because these all just kind of look dark, but when I test it on my test sheet, you can tell that's a very kind of tealy blue-green color, which again is exactly what I want for this box. Blue purple, same thing. I've got my purple already mixed. So I'm going to just take some blue and add it to the purple that I already have mixed up on my palette. And again, it should be something that's halfway between my blue and my purple. And that is exactly what I've got there. Lovely blue purple. And I'm going to paint that into my blue purple box. And then the last color I'm going to mix in this sequence is red purple. And I'm going to need to use a new well because I've already added blue to the purple that's on my palette. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, take some clean water, add my purple, and now your instinct is to want to go to the red that's right across from the purple. That is our warm red. It's actually going to make our purple look a little brown and a little dirty. So we're going to go over to our cool red, which is on the end. I'm going to get a good brush full of that and mix it into my purple, and you should see kind of an immediate change. You know, it becomes a little bit more red, kind of has that almost pinkish color to it, and that is a good red purple, and that's going to be the color that ends our sequence here. All right. So after this, we are going to start mixing up some values for the value scale. So I'm gonna take a quick break. I need to clean my palette off, which you will need to do the same. I'm probably gonna get some fresh water here, and then we're gonna come back and do the two bottom value scales together. All right, so I have cleaned off my palette. It's nice and clean. I got some fresh water, so I have two clean jars again. Obviously, one's going to be to get dirty. And the first thing I'm going to do is add some water to each of my wells. We are going to need all 10 of them for this exercise. So I'm just going to go ahead, add some brushfuls of water to each one. You want to make sure you got at least 3 brushfuls in each, especially if you're using more of a medium brush instead of a large brush, because this needs to last for 2 value scales. All right. Got my last one coming up here, and I am ready to rock and roll. So for this, we're not going to mix any like tertiary colors. I just want you to pick a color that is on the palette that you've got. So I'm going to start with some green, and I'm going to start off by creating the lightest value that I can. And because we've been working with our colors, they're already a little bit wet. So I'm just going to take the tiniest little dab. You saw I just kind of touched the color there, and I'm going to mix it into my water. And you can see that it kind of changed. It almost made my water look a little dirty. In fact, I'm going to take just a tiny bit more. And this is going to be our lightest value. So, excuse me, I'm going to take my scrap piece of paper, and I can't even see that. So I'm actually going to add just a tiny bit more. I want to see a very, very light version of my green right now. So this is barely changing. I know it just kind of looks like my paper's lit, but there's a tiny bit of color in there. So this is going to be my first value. We know that our paper is as light as we can go. So we're going to skip this first box. We're going to go right to our second box, and we're going to paint this first value into that box right there. And I like to go clockwise. That's easier for me to remember. So I'm going to use this as my next one. And my goal is to get this little pile of water a little bit darker than this one right here. So I'm going to take just a tiny bit more. And this is why having the scrap paper is good to have nearby, because I already have my first swatch on here that you can kind of barely see. So I'm going to paint my next swatch to it, and you can already see that that's a little darker. That's exactly what I want to go for. So that's now going to be my next box. If it is not dark enough, you can take just a tiny bit more of whatever color you chose. If it is too dark and we have too big of a jump, you can always add a little bit more water to the color to lighten it back up, all right? So I'm going to continue this process. I'm going to start to get a little darker until I get to about where my green is. That sounds about right. So this should be the most intense version of my color. So I'm going to continue ahead. I'm going to take a little bit more of the pigment. I'm going to try and make the next one just a bit darker. Maybe more at the blue-green area. And that's looking a little bit darker. So that's going to be my next box. So I'm actually going to paint this all the way up to about my blue-green box. So opposite this one. Okay, I'm going to keep getting more and more intense. I'm going to keep adding more pigment because I want the boxes to get increasingly darker. And this is going to make the next effect that we do much easier because you're already going to have all of your values set and on your palette. That's definitely darker, so that's going to be my next box. So you can see that with even one color, you can get a lot of different values and steps in here. And I'm being a little careful around my edges. We talked about how when you have wet paint next to wet paint, it'll do something called a bleed. And I'm trying to keep that from happening right now. You're going to see in the next value scale, the last one we're going to do together, how that's going to change a bit. But for now, we're going to try and keep them from bleeding too much into each other. All right, and again, keeping up with my goal, just making that color a little darker every time I go into a new well. And by the end, you're going to be able to tell where your lightest value is and your darkest value is based on the way that we've kind of put them on the palette. When you put them in order, that helps you remember, okay, this is the way that I went, and this is the direction I went in to get this to increase. So technically I have 2 steps left that I'm going to do with this. So this one I want to make a bit more pigmented. And that almost looks the same, so that tells me I need a little bit more pigment in there. I might have a little too much water. And really make sure that when you are getting to these next levels, see, that's much better, that your pigmentation is much stronger. If there's too much water in your color, you're not going to get a really good value scale effect going because your colors are going to be too light. And you can get pretty intense with this pigment, even adding it to water. I know the tendency is to want to just take it right off the palette, but again, that's going to keep it sticky. We do not want sticky paint on our papers. Put 2 more in here. See if that works. See if this is most intense, and that looks pretty darn dark. So that's going to be my final green in the sequence before we start adding some black to make the color even darker. All right, and that's what these last few boxes are going to be for. If white is the lightest we can go, we know that black is going to be the darkest we can go. We're going to paint this last box black, but we want to work our way up to that. So I'm going to try and make these last 3 about as strong as this one, this box right here. And I'm going to test them to be sure. Could use a little bit more. We don't always get it right the first time. I know I don't, so I don't expect you to. Which is why I keep going back and taking more pigment, and I test it and I look. I know we can get impatient. We want things to be done quickly. Quickly doesn't necessarily equate being done well. So we want to make sure that we are doing this well, not just quickly. And that looks good. And now my last one. Just want to make sure that I've got some nice intense greens for these last few wells. And that looks good. Okay, so now at this point we want to start getting darker. So I know these last three that I mixed, okay, because this is my lightest one, are going to be a little bit darker. I'm going to take a little bit of black. Now I haven't used the black at all, so I'm going to take a little bit more than I normally would. Remember that black is a really strong pigment and it can take over the color very quickly. So you only want to start off with a little bit, and you should see just a little bit of a change in the color. And you can't really see it on the palette, but it did change a little bit. And when I paint it here, you can kind of tell that that color is definitely darker than the green that is next to it. So that's going to be my next value in the sequence. So I'm going to rinse my brush off. I'm going to take a little bit more black, and that's going to be my next value. And this one definitely got darker. I can still see some green in it, which is what we want. We don't want it to be solid black yet, so this is very kind of a dark green. I know it looks kind of black on the screen, but it's definitely a darker green. That is my next value in the sequence. And I'm going to get one more before I paint this last final box black. So I'm definitely putting in even more black. Swirl, swirl, swirl. I think I'm going to need just a tiny bit more. I want that to be darker. Again, I don't want it to be black. I want it to be a darker version of my green. And that definitely has some green in it. It's super, super dark. That's going to be the last one that we mix with our green. And then our very, very last box, we are going to paint black. And now there's no more wells for me to mix in. So all I'm going to do is put a couple of drops right here in the middle of the palette. You can mix there too. And I'm going to mix up just some black. As you can see, it gets pretty strong pretty quickly. And then just make sure it's nice and dark. I might add just a tiny bit more. My pigment. And then black is going to be the very last box. All right. And so now we're going to give this just a few seconds to kind of dry. You don't want the paint to be super wet because we're going to need to pick up our paper for the next, for the very last scale that we're going to do. So you can kind of see as it goes down how darker the colors are going to get as you start to add more pigment, add more black towards your end into our kind of shadowy colors. And our goal for this next one is going to be to paint without stopping. So right now you can kind of tell I've stopped where the lines kind of are. There's little breaks in between. We are going to use those lines that are drawn to kind of help us see where we need to change. And then we're going to try and do a full sort of what we call an ombre or a mixed value set without stopping. All right. And I would let yours dry a little bit more. I just want to kind of get through this instructional just so you guys can kind of see how this is going to work. So I'm going to kind of position things so you can see what I'm doing the entire time. I'm going to kind of keep my palette. I know my palette's going to be a little out of sight, but I'm going to be starting with my lightest value just like I did up here. And then I'm immediately going to go into the next value as I get to each box. So I'll zoom out just a little bit so you guys can kind of see the whole thing and this whole process. So I'm getting my lightest green on my brush, which is this one right here. And that's exactly where I'm going to start. So you got to kind of work a little quickly when doing this. And just like with your flat wash, all I'm going to do is just kind of work that back and forth, sort of feeding that bead. If there's too much liquid on my brush, I just kind of dry it off. I pick up my next color, which is a little darker, and continue down. Get to the edge of that box, dry my brush off a little bit, pick up my next value, and then continue. So you're kind of doing the same value scale, except this time we're not just painting in one box at a time. We're kind of doing the whole thing in the flat wash style. So if you were trying to get sort of an ombre effect going in your paintings, this would be a way to go about it. You would pre-mix whatever color is there so that you've got it all ready to go on your palette. I'm going to kind of pick up a little bit of that color. It's a little too wet. Go to my next one. And as you can see, as it goes, the water's kind of flowing down. The color's getting deeper because I keep picking up new color. I'm going to go, this is my last pure green before I get into my shadows. And again, I'm going to kind of pick up a little bit of that liquid. My brush is getting a little wet. And I don't want this to sort of run away with me. So now I'm grabbing my shadowy color. My first one. My second one. Pick up a little bit. My third one, and then finally the black, which again is in the very center of our palette. Get some of that excess off, and we have finished our chart. Remember, these three that are up here were your experimentation with the different textures. And now that we've completed our chart, we're going to start moving into our final painting, which we're going to utilize some of these textures as we are looking at the different food or flowers that we chose for this. So that's it for this segment, and happy painting. We will see you for the next one.